The starter's pistol cracked through the humid Georgia air, and 17-year-old Jasmine Wells exploded from lane 4 like she was running from her past. The packed stands of the state championship thundered with 12,000 voices, their roar washing over the red clay track of Columbus High School. But as Jasmine rounded the first turn of the 800-meter final, her mind flashed back to 3 years ago to that empty aluminum bleacher section where only her grandmother sat. Clapping alone in the silence of her very first meet, her spikes bit into the same type of track surface, her lungs burned with the same familiar fire, but everything else had changed. The girl who once ran in hand-me-down shoes now wore custom Nike spikes, her name emblazoned across the back of her Oakwood Academy uniform. The scholarship offers from Duke, Georgia Tech, and Auburn sat in neat piles on her bedroom desk, but none of that mattered now. What mattered was the girl in lane 6, Madison Crawford from Atlanta. Prep who'd stumbled just 50 meters ahead. The crowd's roar shifted to gasps as Madison hit the track hard. Her ankle twisted beneath her dreams of a college scholarship potentially shattered on the unforgiving surface. Jasmine had 350 meters left to secure her own future, to prove that a girl from rural Oakwood could run with anyone in the state. But as she approached the fallen runner, her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. "Baby, how you win matters more than if you win." And in that moment, Jasmine Wells faced the choice that would define not just her race, but her character. Hello my friends, before we continue our story, leave your like, share the story, and subscribe to the channel. Thank you. Oakwood, Georgia, was the kind of place where everyone knew your business before you did, where the Dairy Queen doubled as the town's social center, and where Friday night football was less entertainment than religion. Population 2,847, it sat 40 miles south of Atlanta, surrounded by peach orchards and cotton fields that stretched to the horizon. The town's claim to fame was a single traffic light and a Walmart that drew shoppers from 3 counties over. Most folks worked the land, the chicken processing plant, or made the daily commute to Atlanta's suburbs for better-paying jobs. The Wells family lived in a weathered shotgun house on Pine Street, where the paint peeled like sunburned skin and the front porch sagged under the weight of Georgia summers. Jasmine's grandmother, Miss Ruby, had raised her since she was 7. After Jasmine's mama ran off with a trucker and never looked back, Miss Ruby worked double shifts at the plant, her hands permanently stained from years of processing chicken, but she never complained. "Child, we got what we need," she'd say, counting out bills for the electric company. "The Lord provides, and hard work does the rest." Jasmine discovered running by accident in 8th grade, when she was late for the school bus and had to sprint 6 blocks to catch it. Coach Martinez, the high school track coach, happened to be driving by and saw her blazing down Maple Street in her school uniform and backpack. "Girl runs like she's got fire in her feet," he told Miss Ruby that evening. "You ever think about track and field?" Miss Ruby had laughed, wiping her hands on her apron. "Mr. Martinez, we can barely afford her school supplies. Running's free. But everything else about sports costs money we don't have." But Coach Martinez saw something in Jasmine that even she didn't recognize yet. He'd grown up in Oakwood, graduated from the same high school, and knew what it meant to have talent but lack opportunity. "Tell you what, Miss Ruby," he said, his voice gentle but determined. "I'll cover her gear, her registration fees, everything. All she has to do is show up and run." Miss Ruby looked at her granddaughter, saw the spark of hope in her eyes, and nodded slowly. "Baby, you want to try this running thing?" Jasmine's smile could have lit up the entire county. The Oakwood High Track team consisted of 12 athletes, total, sharing equipment that had seen better decades. The track itself was more patched than original surface, with weeds growing through cracks in the outer lanes. But to Jasmine, it might as well have been the Olympics. She'd arrive early, every morning, running laps as the sun painted the sky pink and gold, her breath visible in the cool air. The other kids called her crazy, but Jasmine had found something that made her feel powerful, something that was entirely her own. Her first race was a disaster by any conventional measure. The meet was held at a rival school, and Jasmine lined up for the 800 meters wearing borrowed spikes that were a size too big. She'd practiced the distance exactly twice, both times alone, on Oakwood's broken track. When the gun fired, she took off like it was a sprint, leading by 30 meters after the first 200. By the 400-meter mark, she was dying, her lungs screaming for air, her legs turning to concrete. She finished dead last, nearly 2 minutes behind the winner, and stumbled off the track feeling like she'd been hit by a truck. The other school's athletes snickered. Their coaches shook their heads, and even some of her own teammates looked embarrassed. But Miss Ruby was there in the stands, clapping like her granddaughter had just won Olympic gold. "You finished, baby," she said, wrapping Jasmine in a hug that smelled like her favorite perfume and chicken plant antiseptic. "That's more than most folks can say about anything in their lives." Coach Martinez put his hand on Jasmine's shoulder and smiled. "First race is always the hardest. But I saw something out there, something special. You ready to work?" Jasmine nodded, tears still fresh on her cheeks, but her jaw set with determination that would carry her through the next 3 years. The transformation didn't happen overnight, but it happened completely. Coach Martinez restructured Jasmine's entire approach to running, teaching her about pacing, about the 800 being 2 laps of controlled aggression rather than an all-out sprint. They worked on her starts, her breathing, her kick, spending hours after school on that patched-up track, while the sun set behind the pine trees. Miss Ruby would pick her up after her own shift ended, sometimes finding them still running wind sprints under the flickering stadium lights that the Booster Club had installed back in 1987. Word began to spread through the small community as Jasmine's times dropped dramatically. From that first disastrous to 47, she ran to 23 by the end of her freshman year, then to 18 as a sophomore. The local newspaper, the Oakwood Gazette, ran a small feature about her progress, calling her our hometown speed demon. But more importantly, college recruiters started showing up at meets, clipboards in hand, stopwatches around their necks. They'd nod appreciatively at her times, then inevitably ask about her academic record, her family situation, her coachability. The attention created pressure that Jasmine had never experienced before. Suddenly, every practice mattered, every race was scrutinized, every stumble analyzed. Miss Ruby noticed the change first, how her granddaughter had stopped laughing at dinner, how she'd stare at her homework without really seeing it. "Baby, you carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders," she said one evening, setting down a plate of cornbread and greens. "This running thing's supposed to make you happy, not make you sick with worry." The breaking point came during junior year. At the regional championships, Jasmine had been running consistently under 2:15, fast enough to attract serious attention from Division I schools, but as she lined up for the 800, she could feel the eyes of a dozen college scouts in the stands. Her heart was pounding before the race even started, her breathing shallow and rapid. When the gun fired, she froze for a split second, then overcompensated by going out too fast again. She faded badly in the final 200 meters, finishing 4th and missing the state meet qualification by 0.3 of a second. She sat in the infield afterward, head in her hands, sobbing with the kind of grief that comes from watching dreams slip away. Coach Martinez found her there 20 minutes later, after the crowd had dispersed and the other athletes had packed up their gear. "You know what I see when I look at you?" he asked, sitting beside her on the grass. "I see a girl who's forgotten why she started running in the first place. You didn't start for the colleges or the scholarships or the newspaper articles. You started because you found something you loved, something that made you feel alive." That night, Miss Ruby made her favorite meal: fried chicken, mac and cheese, and green beans cooked with fat backhand. They sat on the front porch afterward, watching fireflies dance in the humid air. "Your mama, she had talent too," Miss Ruby said quietly. "Could sing like an angel. But she got so caught up in what everyone else wanted from her, that she forgot what she wanted for herself. Don't make her mistake, baby. Don't let other people's expectations steal your joy." Jasmine leaned against her grandmother's shoulder, feeling the weight of pressure lifting from her chest for the first time in months. The next morning, she was back on the track before sunrise, but this time she wasn't running for college scouts or scholarship offers. She was running for the same reason she'd started 3 years ago, because it made her feel like she could fly. Coach Martinez arrived to find her laughing as she completed her cooldown, her face bright with rediscovered joy. "There she is," he said, smiling. "There's my runner." And as senior year approached, Jasmine Wells was ready to show the world what she could really do. Senior year brought unprecedented attention to Oakwood High's track program, and, by extension, to Jasmine herself. ESPN's recruiting website listed her as a top 50 prospect nationally, and her times consistently ranked in the top 5 in Georgia. The small town that had barely noticed her 3 years earlier now treated her like a celebrity. The local bank put her photos on their electronic sign, rotating with advertisements for checking accounts and mortgage rates. The Dairy Queen named a Sunday after her the Jasmine Jet and hung a banner celebrating her achievements, but fame came with complications that no one had prepared her for. Suddenly, everyone was an expert on her training, her race strategy, her college choices. Well-meaning townspeople would corner her at the grocery store, offering unsolicited advice about which universities she should consider. "My cousin's boy went to Georgia Tech," they'd say, blocking her path between the cereal and the milk. "Got himself a good engineering job. You should think about that." The pressure was constant, suffocating, and it followed her everywhere she went. The academic demands intensified as well. College recruiters weren't just interested in her times, they wanted transcripts, SAT scores, recommendations. Miss Ruby had never graduated high school herself, so she couldn't help with calculus or AP English essays. Jasmine found herself staying up until midnight most nights, struggling through homework that seemed designed to weed out kids like her. "I'm smart enough," she'd whisper to herself, erasing another wrong answer. "I belong here. I can do this." But doubt crept in during the quiet moments, whispering that maybe she was just a fast runner from a small town who didn't belong in classrooms with kids who'd been preparing for college since kindergarten. The physical demands were equally challenging. Coach Martinez had connected her with a sports scientist in Atlanta who designed more sophisticated training regimens than anything Oakwood had ever seen. 2-a-day practices became the norm, with morning tempo runs followed by afternoon speed work. Her body was constantly sore, constantly pushed to its limits. She'd ice her shins in the bathtub at night, the cold water shocking against her skin, while Miss Ruby rubbed her shoulders and worried about her granddaughter's pale complexion and the weight she was losing. Everything came to a head at the state indoor championships in February. Jasmine had been dealing with a nagging hamstring injury for weeks, but she'd hidden it from Coach Martinez, afraid that missing training would derail her scholarship prospects. As she warmed up for the 800, she could feel the muscle tightening, sending warning signals up her leg, but she ignored them, focusing instead on the college coaches in the stands, their notebooks open, their stopwatches ready. The race started perfectly. Jasmine settled into 4th place through the first 400, exactly where she wanted to be. The pace was honest, but not suicidal, 2:08 through the half, putting her on track for a personal best. She could feel the strength in her legs, the rhythm of her breathing, the confidence that came from months of perfect preparation. But, as she moved into her kick with 300 meters to go, disaster struck. Her hamstring seized completely, sending her sprawling across lanes 3 and 4 in a tangle of limbs and shattered dreams. The silence in the arena was deafening. Jasmine lay on the track, not from physical pain, but from the crushing weight of failure. She'd let down her grandmother, her coach, her town, and herself. The other runners continued their race, stepping around her prostrate form, while officials rushed over with medical equipment. But the real damage wasn't to her leg, it was to her confidence, her belief that she belonged on the same track as these elite athletes. As they carried her off on a stretcher, she closed her eyes and wondered if this was how her story would end. The aftermath was almost worse than the injury itself. Newspaper articles speculated about her college prospects. using phrases like concerning injury history and questions about durability. Several schools that had been recruiting her aggressively went quiet, their phone calls becoming less frequent, their letters more generic. Miss Ruby tried to stay positive, bringing her granddaughter her favorite magazines and keeping up a steady stream of encouraging chatter, but Jasmine could see the worry in her eyes. The way she'd pause sometimes while folding laundry, staring out the window with the weight of uncertainty on her shoulders. The road back began in the most unlikely place. The physical therapy clinic. In downtown Atlanta, where Jasmine spent 3 days a week rebuilding her hamstring and, more importantly, her confidence. Her therapist, Dr. Sarah Chen, was a former runner herself who'd competed at Stanford before a career-ending injury forced her into rehabilitation work. "You know what separates good runners from great ones?" she asked Jasmine during their first session. "It's not the fast times or the perfect races, it's how they respond when everything falls apart." Dr. Chen introduced Jasmine to meditation and visualization techniques, teaching her to see her body as an integrated system rather than just a collection of fast-twitch muscles. They worked on her breathing, her core strength, her mental approach to competition. "Your body is stronger than you think," Dr. Chen said, watching Jasmine complete a complex balance exercise. "But your mind is where the real power lives. You've been running scared for months, afraid of failure instead of hungry for success. That's not sustainable at this level." The breakthrough came during a routine training run in March, 6 weeks after the indoor disaster. Jasmine was jogging easy miles on the Oakwood track, her hamstring feeling solid for the first time in months. The afternoon sun was warm on her shoulders, and she found herself smiling as she rounded the turns. She wasn't thinking about times, or college scouts, or scholarship offers. She was just running, enjoying the simple pleasure of movement, the rhythm of her footsteps on the familiar surface. Coach Martinez watched from the infield, noting the change in her demeanor. "You look different," he said afterward, as they walked cool-down laps together. "Lighter, somehow." Jasmine nodded, still catching her breath. "I remembered why I love this," she said. "Not the winning, or the attention, or the college stuff. Just the running itself, the feeling of being strong, of pushing my body to do things that seemed impossible." Coach Martinez smiled, remembering the determined 8th grader who'd first stepped onto his track 4 years ago. "There's my girl," he said. "Now we can get back to work." The work was different this time, smarter, more focused, driven by joy rather than fear. Jasmine's times began dropping again, but more importantly, she was enjoying the process. She laughed during hard workouts, encouraged her teammates, and approached each race with the excitement of someone who genuinely loved competing. The college recruiters began calling again, but now their interest felt like validation rather than pressure. She belonged here, not because she was fast, but because she was a runner. Miss Ruby noticed the change immediately. Her granddaughter was eating better, sleeping more soundly, and had started singing in the shower, against something she hadn't done since sophomore year. "You got your light back," she said one evening, watching Jasmine stretch on the living room floor. "I was getting worried we'd lost it for good." Jasmine hugged her grandmother, breathing in the familiar scent of her perfume and feeling grateful for the woman who'd never stopped believing in her. The real test came at the regional championships in May, the same meet where her dreams had shattered the year before. This time, Jasmine approached the competition with quiet confidence. Her hamstring completely healed, her mind clear and focused. She'd already secured her spot at the state meet with earlier performances, so this race was about proving to herself that she could compete with the best without fear. As she settled into lane 4 for the 800, she felt the familiar pre-race butterflies, but now they felt like excitement rather than terror. The Georgia State Track and Field Championships transformed Columbus High School into a carnival of athletic excellence, with 12,000 spectators filling the stadium and creating an atmosphere that made Jasmine's first lonely meet seem like a lifetime ago. The facility buzzed with energy parents clutching programs, college scouts with their telltale clipboards and stopwatches, and athletes from across the state warming up on the pristine track. The smell of concession stand popcorn mixed with the sharp scent of liniment and the fresh rubber of new spikes. Jasmine's warm-up felt perfect. Her hamstring was loose and strong, her breathing relaxed, her stride smooth and effortless. Coach Martinez watched her with quiet satisfaction. Noting the confidence in her movements, the way she smiled and waved to Miss Ruby in the stands. "How you feeling?" he asked, as they walked toward the call room. "Like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be," Jasmine replied, her voice calm and certain. The scared girl who'd frozen at regionals the year before was gone, replaced by a young woman who understood her own strength. The 800-meter field was loaded with talent. Madison Crawford from Atlanta Prep was the defending state champion, her personal best of 2:06 ranking her third nationally among high school girls. Sarah Kim from Gwinnett County had run 2:07 earlier in the season, and she'd never lost a race in Georgia. But Jasmine's season best of 2:09 had come in a driving rainstorm, and everyone knew she was capable of much faster. The local newspapers had dubbed it the race of the century, and the packed stadium suggested they weren't exaggerating. As the girls took their marks, Jasmine felt the familiar pre-race stillness descend over the stadium. 12,000 people holding their breath, waiting for the crack of the starter's pistol. She settled into her blocks, her spikes gripping the track, her eyes focused on the line painted 80 meters ahead. Runners, set. The stadium fell silent. Then the gun fired, and 8 of the fastest girls in Georgia exploded forward like thoroughbreds out of the gate. Jasmine's race plan was simple: sit fourth through 400 meters, then move steadily through the field over the final 300. She executed it perfectly, tucking in behind the early leaders as they passed the 228 seconds, fast but not suicidal. The crowd was a roar of white noise, thousands of voices blending into a wall of sound that seemed to lift the runners forward. Through 400 meters, they passed in 61 seconds. With Jasmine exactly where she wanted to be, her breathing controlled, her legs still fresh. But as they entered the back straight, disaster struck the field. Madison Crawford, running in lane 6, caught her spike on the rail and went down hard, her ankle twisting beneath her as she hit the track. The crowd gasped, then fell silent as the defending champion lay motionless. Her Olympic dreams potentially shattered on the unforgiving surface. Jasmine was directly behind her, with perfect position to move into medal contention. When she saw Madison's face, not the face of a rival, but of a 17-year-old girl whose world had just collapsed. Without thinking, Jasmine stopped running. She knelt beside Madison, ignoring the other runners streaming past them, ignoring the coaches screaming from the infield, ignoring everything except the girl who needed help. "Hey, you're okay," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "Can you sit up?" Madison nodded, tears streaming down her face, her ankle already beginning to swell. "My scholarship," she whispered. "Auburn, they're here watching." Jasmine helped her to her feet, supporting her weight as they limped toward the inside of the track. "The race isn't over," she said, surprising herself with the words, "and neither are you." Asterisk, asterisk. The officials were confused, the crowd was stunned, and the other runners were already rounding the final turn when Jasmine made her decision. She'd helped Madison to the safety of the infield, ensuring that medical personnel could attend to her injury. But the 800 meters was still in progress. There was still 200 meters left to run, and technically, she was still in the race. The rulebook was clear. Unless a runner officially withdrew or was disqualified, they could continue competing until the race was over. "Go," Madison said, grabbing Jasmine's arm with surprising strength. "You can still catch them. Go." The medical staff was already taking over, ice packs and examination tools appearing with practiced efficiency. Jasmine looked at the runners ahead of her now, nearly 100 meters away, and moving fast toward the finish line. It was impossible. No one had ever made up that much ground in the final 200 meters of an 800. But as she stood there, she heard something that changed everything. The crowd began to chant her name. Jasmine, Jasmine, Jasmine. It started with a small section of Oakwood supporters, but it spread like wildfire through the stadium. 12,000 people rose to their feet, their voices joining in rhythmic support for the girl who'd chosen compassion over competition. The sound was deafening, primal, electric. Jasmine felt it in her bones, in her blood, in the very core of her being. She looked up at the stands, found Miss Ruby's face in the crowd, and saw her grandmother pointing toward the track with tears streaming down her cheeks. Coach Martinez was screaming from the infield, his voice barely audible over the crowd. Run! Run, run! But Jasmine was already moving, her spikes finding purchase on the track. Her stride opening up as she began the most unlikely chase in Georgia high school history. The leaders were entering the final straight, maybe 80 meters from the finish line, when Jasmine started her kick. The gap was insurmountable by any logical measure, but logic had left the building. What happened next defied everything anyone thought they knew about the 800 meters. Jasmine's stride lengthened, her breathing remained controlled, and her speed continued to build with each step. The crowd noise was so loud it registered on the stadium's sound meters, creating a wall of support that seemed to physically push her forward. She passed the 600-meter mark, running faster than she'd ever run in her life. Her split time showing 1:32 apace. That would have been impossible at the beginning of the race, but now felt inevitable. The leaders heard the crowd before they saw her. Sarah Kim, who'd been in the lead since the 600, glanced over her shoulder and couldn't believe what she was seeing. Jasmine Wells, the girl who'd supposedly dropped out of the race, was bearing down on them like a freight train. Her form was perfect, her expression focused but serene, and she was running with the kind of supernatural speed that enters sports legend. With 50 meters to go, she was in fourth place. With 30 meters to go, she was in second. With 20 meters to go, she had taken the lead. The final 20 meters seemed to unfold in slow motion. Jasmine's legs were screaming, her lungs were burning, but her will was unbreakable. She crossed the finish line with a 3-meter lead, her arms raised not in triumph, but in disbelief. The clock read 2 minutes, 6 seconds and 47 milliseconds, new personal best, a new school record, and fast enough to have won the state championship in any year in Georgia history. But more than that, it was a time that had been earned through character. Through the choice to help a fallen competitor when winning seemed impossible. Asterisk, asterisk. The immediate aftermath was chaos. Officials had to review video footage to confirm that Jasmine had indeed remained in the race, that her stop to help Madison Crawford hadn't constituted an official withdrawal. The stadium crowd remained on their feet, chanting and cheering, while photographers captured images that would appear on front pages across the state. Miss Ruby made it down from the stands somehow, wrapping her granddaughter in a hug that lasted several minutes, both of them crying and laughing simultaneously. But the real story wasn't about the record time or the dramatic finish. It was about the hug between Jasmine and Madison in the medical tent afterward. About the way Madison's tears had changed from despair to joy as she realized her ankle wasn't seriously injured. It was about the Auburn coach who approached them, both, saying he'd never seen anything like what had happened on the track. That his program would be honored to have either of them. It was about the way 12,000 strangers had witnessed something that reminded them why they loved sports in the first place. The years that followed brought everything that had been promised and more. Jasmine accepted the scholarship to Auburn, where she became a 2-time All-American and helped her team win an SEC championship. Madison recovered completely from her ankle injury and joined her in Alabama, where their friendship became the foundation of one of the most successful middle-distance programs in the country. But when they looked back on their careers, they always returned to that moment in Columbus, Georgia. When compassion proved faster than competition, Miss Ruby kept the newspaper clippings in a scrapbook, along with photos from graduation and letters from college coaches. But her favorite keepsake was a simple video clip that went viral in the days after the race. 12,000 people chanting her granddaughter's name, supporting a girl who'd chosen to help instead of win. "That's my baby. she'd tell anyone who would listen. That's my girl who remembered that how you win matters more than if you win. The race changed Oakwood, too. The town that had barely noticed its lone track star became a destination for runners from across the state, drawn by the story of what was possible when talent meets character. Coach Martinez started a scholarship fund in Jasmine's name, helping kids from small towns get the support they needed to chase their dreams. The old track got resurfaced, with a plaque at the finish line commemorating the day when a girl from Pine Street showed the world what it meant to be truly fast. And sometimes, on quiet mornings when the mist rises from the peach orchards and the air smells like possibilities, you can still hear the echo of that crowd in Columbus. 12,000 voices joined in celebration of the moment when a teenage girl discovered that the most important race isn't the one you run against others, but the one you run toward becoming the person you're meant to be. ****